Welcome to UO Today. I'm Barbara Altman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest today is Dr. Beverly Wright, environmental justice scholar and activist. Wright is the founder of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice at Dillard University in New Orleans. The center addresses environmental and health inequities along the Mississippi River Chemical Corridor and is a community-university partnership providing education, training, and job placement. Since Hurricane Katrina, the center has focused largely on research, policy, community outreach, assistance, and the education of displaced African American residents of New Orleans. Wright served as co-chair of the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Task Force for New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu's transition team and is currently serving on the Ethics Review Board for the City of New Orleans. She has served on the Corps of Engineers Environmental Advisory Board, the Mayor's Office of Environmental Affairs Brownfields Consortium, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. She currently co-chairs the Environmental Justice Climate Change Initiative and is a member of the Commission delegation to the UN Conference on Climate Change. Wright has received many awards, including the Robert Wood Johnson Community Health Leadership Award in 2006, the 2008 EPA Environmental Justice Achievement Award, the Rainbow Push Coalition 2008 Community Award, the Ford Motor Company's Freedom Sisters Award in July of 2009, the 2009 Heinz Award, as well as the 2010 Beta Kappa Chi Humanitarian Assistance Award bestowed by the National Institute of Science. Wright gave a talk entitled "The Perilous Consequences of Public Policy Decisions, Weathering the Storm of Natural and Man-Made Disasters in the Gulf" on February 2, 2011. She was the guest of the UO Center for the Study of Women in Society. Their Women's Rights in a Global World is the 2010-11 inaugural series of the Lorwin Lectureship on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. Beverly, welcome to UO Today.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Happy to be here.
You are an extremely busy woman.
Yes.
We know you just got here, so I'm really thankful that you were willing to take the time to talk to us.
You're most welcome.
Now, you've leapt into yet another level of prominence since Hurricane Katrina, but you've been doing this work since long before Katrina happened in 2005. You've been working on environmental issues in the Mississippi Delta for long before that. Can you tell us about your earlier efforts?
Yes, in 1992, I founded the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice at Xavier University, where I was for 13 years. I moved to Dillard right after Katrina. But it has a curious beginning because I was actually on sabbatical from Wake Forest University at home when I was called to a meeting because I had begun doing some research on race and toxics. And I was called to a meeting and asked if I would be willing to found a center dealing with environmental justice. We had been asking EPA to fund regional centers around the country on these particular issues, and we had gotten word that they might be ready to do it. So I was asked while I was on sabbatical if I would help pull together this proposal for such a center. EPA did not immediately fund the center, but Xavier University's president, Dr. Norman Francis, said that he wanted to support it, and so he brought me on board part-time to develop the center itself, and he funded us for that first year. That was the beginning. But the question is why? You know, what I began to see was that African Americans living along the Mississippi River Chemical Corridor were really inundated with these petrochemical industries, petrochemical facilities. And the industry itself, you know, which ran along an 80-mile stretch between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, there were 136 petrochemical plants. And communities actually were fence-lined with these plants. Most of the people were African American. You would find, if you rode along River Road, you'd find black communities, and then you'd see a community that was no longer there. And when you ask the question, well, who used to live over there? They'd say, well, the white people lived there, but the boss moved them out. He said he was coming back for us, but he didn't. And so you have this curious pattern you know, along the Mississippi River chemical corridor, where African Americans have been left to suffer from all of the fumes from these chemical plants, and they were dying. I was asked to come in because they were calling for a civil rights hearing, and I was asked to testify. But before I did, I decided to take that journey up that river road to see what I could find. And what I found was people with crosses, little white crosses in front of their on their lawns that depicted the number of family members that had passed away. Some houses had 5, others had 6. Their screens on their windows would rust and literally fall off the windows every 6 months. They had spots on their cars on one side, the side that was downwind from the plants, and they looked like space cars, we called them. You always knew a car from upriver because the paint would be eaten out in circles. So one side of the car would have these circles where the paint was missing. They had the vegetation around their homes would only grow on one side, the opposite side of the plant. And they were having nosebleeds at night. They were having headaches. They were waking up vomiting, and many of them had dark black curtains in their windows because of the flaring from the chemical plants that would keep them up at night where it was like daylight. And so, you know, what I found was that nobody was really working with the African American community. There was no leadership. And so the intent of the center was to build leadership in those communities so that they could fight their own battles. The mistakes that were made in the past by many of the green organizations was that they would send, you know, young, energetic white kids in the community to work for a semester. And they might make some progress, but when they left, it was gone. Because the kids couldn't stay there forever. But they left nothing on the ground. All you had were the talents of the young people. And when they left, it was over. So we began a really intense training program for communities along the corridor, and we ended up with 13 communities that were impacted by the chemical plants. We developed training modules like Pollution Prevention 101, introduced them to EPA, you know, taught them what offices they should call if they had problems. We introduced them to all of EPA and LDQ. Then we started having face-to-face meetings with the people from all of the different offices. And then we became a travel agent because we would send, you know, with our grant money, we'd send them to Washington to meet with people and to demonstrate and all of those kinds of things. And we, over a 10-year period, I think we built really strong leadership along that corridor. In fact, so strong that one of our board members got the Goldman Award for the work that she had done in a little community called Norco, Louisiana, where we finally got them relocated. So it's been hard work, it's been gratifying, but really tough, because every time I would go there, I'd end up with a headache from the fumes. You know, and we have communities that are no more, or the only thing that's left in some places are the graveyards right next to the plants, because that's the only people who can live. You can live dead. You must be dead to live next to these facilities. We worked really hard to try to get DEQ to enforce the rules to reduce emissions. We worked with EPA in the enforcement office and made some headway, but it is a life struggle fighting the petrochemical industry in Louisiana. That is one of the major tax base, you know, for the state. So you're coming up against Goliath. But we're still working, and in some cases, the best thing to do is to move people out of harm's way. You know, I mean, if you can't win, we have to work to relocate you, and a lot of people want to move. The fight was getting the money that they needed to actually move, because once the chemical plants come in, the property value goes down. So if they're going to give you money based on the property value, once the chemical plants have destroyed your value, there's no place that they can go and buy another house. So the negotiations have been hard to try to make certain that they could leave whole. In other words, if the average home is $80,000, then we worked hard to make certain that people got at least $80,000 so that they could move out And that was our narco win, one of the wins that we had upriver. We've had several, but that's a really good one.
Is that industrialized corridor, is that what you've referred to as Cancer Alley?
Yes, it's infamously known as Cancer Alley because the cancer rates are so high. One of the things that our state health department has done is that they've sort of blurred the data when it comes to cancer, and they'll always tell you that the cancer rates in Louisiana are about average for African Americans, and average for the country, and it's because they don't disaggregate the data. And so if you have communities that are fence lined, the cancer rates are extremely high there, but the further out you go, then there are fewer cancers that you will find. And so when they dump all of the data together, then those few people, that data disappears and it becomes insignificant. And so that's how they've been able to skirt the issue for a very long time. They no longer can do that because of the attention that we brought to this issue, because of the Environmental Justice Executive Order that was put in place under the Clinton administration, and because we now have an Office of Environmental Justice at EPA, and in every branch of government there's an environmental justice liaison or an office. So some of our early work, has paid off. I have to tell you that for the last 8 years under the Bush administration, nothing was done. We had an interagency working group that just was dormant. I mean, he didn't dismantle it, but he made certain that it wasn't funded and that nothing came out of those offices. Since Lisa Jackson has come into this office, she has reignited those offices, and she started the interagency working group again, which means we're working with the Department of Energy, the Department of Labor. Every division has one of those offices to deal with health impacts and exposure to minority and poor communities across the country.
One of the things that I'm really struck by in all of the phases of your work, the founding of the center to work directly with the residents of these neighborhoods in close proximity to the chemical plants, then in your work with residents of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and even in the wake of the BP oil disaster, what you're really doing is training people right there on the site to be activists and to better their own situation. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. The only way you're going to have change is if the people who are affected are involved in that change. If you don't educate, the public to what's happening to them, then you can go in, for 1,000 years and nothing will happen. They have to understand it. They have to know that they have voice. And so education gives voice. Training gives voice to people. And we've also tried to give something back, because having voice and you still have this terrible poverty doesn't make people feel good for long. In other words, you can speak about it, you can meet with the president even, but if you go back home to the same thing and there's no change, then there's no hope. So, in my work over these last almost 30 years, I hate to say that, but it's been about 30 years, what we've done is we've also dealt with training young people in the community so that they can have jobs. They have an economic impact. Many of the communities that have been exposed to these chemicals have to be cleaned up. There are Superfund sites in brownfields. We train young men and women in hazmat, asbestos removal, lead abatement, mold remediation, which really served us well after Katrina, because we had a large number of young people trained in mold remediation. We certainly didn't see this coming, but that was part of our training plan, so young people had jobs. Now we're moving into green jobs. So we're training them in weatherization, for example, green shingles, solar shingles. I'm learning this lingo myself right now. Green sheetrocking, the whole area of green jobs. We're trying to make certain that our young people are involved in that. And this is a special population. I'm at a university, but I work with disadvantaged young men and women. most of the young people in our program have had some run-in with the law. Now, they don't tell you that when they first join the program. This was really kind of shocking for us when we first started about 15 years ago with a grant from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. We've been training young people now for 16 years. And so when we first started out, you know, you ask the question, do you have a record? You know, have you ever been in trouble with the law? They'd all say no. Then and we really wouldn't hold it against them because the program was designed specifically for them. After we'd be in the program for a week, you know, we get, can you call my probation officer? I'm like, probation officer, you know. So now we know, although our program is not for ex-offenders, if you're dealing with a poor urban population, most of them have had some run-in with the law. Minor offenses sometimes, and minor, you know, in the whole scheme of things like possession of stolen goods, like a TV or something like that. Driving without a license. I mean, it's amazing. And many of them have possession, marijuana, you know, those kinds of problems. And that stops them from being able to get a job. And so in this field, it won't stop them from getting the skills and then, you know, getting jobs in these construction areas.
You know, we recently had as a guest Van Jones, whose
Yes.
name has become more or less synonymous with green jobs,
Yes.
and he also got his start on prison reform for young
He
people.
sure did.
So what you're talking about sounds very familiar
Yes.
as a kind of grassroots, hands-on community movement.
Yeah.
Another thing that struck me in reading more about your own history with all of this is that you really live what you're teaching. Your own house was pretty much destroyed by Hurricane Katrina, and
Yes.
you're there, you've rebuilt it, you're still in the same neighborhood?
Yeah, yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the amenities of your neighborhood, what's happening with the demographics, where the
Yeah.
tax base is?
Well, you know, one thing that people don't know about New Orleans is that New Orleans is a very, very old city. It's older than the United States. It was first founded by the French and then the Spanish. And African Americans have been there all that time. My heritage goes back to free coloreds on one side of the family and slaves on the other side. So we're 8 generations in that city, which means that we've been there a very long time. The neighborhood that I live in is called New Orleans East, and it's going eastward towards what we call Mobile, Alabama. If you're trying to get a feel for where we are, it's on that side of the city. Most of the attention after the storm was on the Lower Ninth Ward. And I was always amazed to find out that when people came to New Orleans, they thought all black people lived in the Lower Ninth Ward, and that we were all pitifully poor, which was really not what the Lower Ninth Ward was. We're really desperately poor, which was not the case. The Lower Ninth Ward was made up of houses that black people owned. Many of them built those houses themselves. And to some extent, what was stopping some people from being in abject poverty was that the house was owned. So they didn't have to pay for shelter. They just needed to be able to buy food and pay their utility bills, which allowed them to sustain themselves. New Orleans East, on the other hand, was the direction that the city grew in. And so in the early 70s, New Orleans East was about 50% black and white when I first moved back home in 1974. And it was the up-and-coming, growing area. Well, the oil bust came along, and that city became depleted of most of the white workers that lived there. And the East began to change. A lot of the whites in the city began to move out to St. Tammany Parish and surrounding parishes. The black people stayed. They began to move to New Orleans East. And New Orleans East now is probably, in terms of income, pretty much mixed. But it's made up of working class, middle class, and very wealthy African Americans who own businesses. We have 7 exclusive communities on man-made lakes and 2 gated communities. But if you talk to white people in New Orleans, most of them don't know anything about the East. They just know that it's mostly black and they avoid it like the plague. It's gotten to be something that we take a lot of pride in, because when white people move to our neighborhoods, the cost of the houses go up so high we can't afford them. So I generally tell my girlfriends, don't move to the east. You know, we laugh about that. You're just going to send the price of the housing up. But what's significant about the east is that it is the largest tax base for the city. What's tragic about this is that the east has not gotten the attention that it deserves based on its contributions to the city. We've got none of the amenities. We have 80,000 people living in the east. It is the most populated area, repopulated area of the city. We had no supermarkets for several years, and now we have one supermarket. So I like this bread, 7 grain. If I don't get there early Monday morning, I won't get it. It's like a fight to get to the supermarket to get, you know, the products you really would like to have. We've been fighting for supermarkets. We've been fighting for a hospital. I had a girlfriend who died on the 4th of July of a heart attack in the east. And she was 54 years old. And her name was Ann Mitchell. And I will always wonder if we had a hospital in the east, if we could have saved her. I don't know if we could have. You know, the ambulance got there, I guess, in a decent hour, but she still had to go a long ways to get to a hospital. I had elderly relatives that we could not bring back home because there was no hospital. And the nearest hospital was like 20 minutes away. And if you got caught in traffic, it would be worse than that. We have no shopping center. We have maybe 1 or 2 restaurants. So I have to drive all the way to Metairie, Louisiana, or go all the way downtown to the French Quarter area to buy a pair of stockings or socks, you know, with 80,000 people. When I say just, I'd say in the last week, the announcement was made by the Mayor Mitch Landrieu, and the new hospital board that he put in place, that they had found an operator of the hospital. It's going to be the Daughters of Charity and the Franciscan, I think, nuns. I hope I have that right. But at any rate, we had a hospital in New Orleans East before the storm. New Orleans East was a thriving community. In fact, we had 2 hospitals, Lakeland Hospital as well. It's been 5 years, and that hospital was only damaged on the 1st floor. We've since that time made decisions about Charity Hospital and a new Veterans Hospital. They're breaking grounds for something brand new, and we still don't have a hospital. When I tell people that race plays such an enormous part of, I guess, it has an enormous impact on the quality of life for African Americans in the city of New Orleans, people are amazed. But what a lot of white people don't realize is that it also has an enormous impact on their quality of life. And because the city is so divided residentially, I wouldn't say that New Orleans is a place where you overtly feel racism. You don't. The people are friendly. The people are very polite. You know, no one would ever call me the N-word. You know, like, that would never happen. But when you look at the economic structure and how we have been excluded from that economic structure, that's where it lies. And that's what's hurting the city, that inability to come together in that way.
We're beginning to run out of time, and I don't want to end the interview before I ask you to tell us a little bit about what you have launched as a movement called A Safe Way Back Home. Would you mind just giving a brief description of that?
Yeah, I will, very quickly. Because we have this HAZMAT program, HAZWAPA program, we work with the United Steelworkers and the laborers and all of these people. Right after the storm, we knew that the soil was contaminated, but we also knew it wasn't a Superfund site because of the work that we did. And it would be as simple as remediating your lawns, hosing down your house, and doing the mold remediation to get back home safely. And so in discussions with my colleagues, where we have this training program sponsored by the federal government, they asked me, what can we do to help you? So I told them, I said, well, why don't we do a demonstration project for the feds? Show them that this can be done. Let's remediate one block just one solid block, and began conducting training classes for people so that they would know how to go home safely. And we did. We partnered with the steel workers. It was an amazing project. I always tell people when we decided to do this, we were drinking wine. And when we were sober, we realized, my God, what have we done? But we remediated, I think it was 27 houses on one block, the block where I lived, because I had to be able to contact every person so they could sign legal forms. We had 180 volunteers from around the country, young kids that came and worked with us one solid weekend. We removed the topsoil, we put clean river sand and sod, and brought that block back alive. And that has actually worked to bring my neighborhood back. So when people saw we could come back, they'd come home and see green grass, and they said, oh my God, we can come back. I said, yes, but this is what you have to do. So we've done schools and playgrounds as well. So we called the project a safe way back home. Of course, the government didn't listen.
Nonetheless, there's all those safer places where
That's
people
right.
can reestablish their lives.
That's right.
Last question, Beverly. In an interview that you gave with the program Living on Earth, I read that you said that you feel that young people are less racist than the older generations, and that it gives you hope. Have you got hope?
I do. Oh, I do. Oh my God, they're just so much less racist than my generation. We need to die out. I'm in the should die out generation and take a lot of the horrible stuff with us. I think that because the world is smaller, because of the internet, and because of, believe it or not, integration to some extent, young people see a different world. They listen to what the older people say, but there's so much dissonance between what the older people are saying and what they encounter on their own. And so I find the young people to be just so much more open. I'm not saying they're 100%, but I mean, from where I've come from, it's 500% better. So I have a lot of hope for the world. I do.
I'm glad we can stop on that note. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you very much.
We've been speaking with Dr. Beverly Wright, environmental justice scholar, activist, and founder of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice at Dillard University in New Orleans. On February 2nd, 2011, Wright gave a talk entitled The Perilous Consequences of Public Policy Decisions, Weathering the Storm of Natural and Man-Made Disasters in the Gulf. Wright was a guest of the UO's Center for the Study of Women in Society. Their Women's Rights in a Global World is the 2010-11 inaugural series of the Lorwin Lectureship on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.